Hello there, and welcome to the Impact Zone podcast. We are back to talk more TNA wrestling shenanigans, and I guess, again, we've got to tackle this negative TNA perception issue. It was a recent post, or a few recent posts there, news coming up, and this has come up a few times here and there, of TNA trying to get a new TV distribution deal, trying to get more streaming. I think it was Frankie Kazarian that was coming through with this one there. We talked about, I think, the one with Matt Hardy, and there's been a few other reports of late in the last year or so. There've been a lot more sort of discussions here and there, and we've heard this sort of come out here and there over the last couple of years and whatnot. But the problem that we have, per se, in some ways, is we could get that deal. We could easily get that deal. And I do think that the perception has been shifting and whatnot. But there is still a very big negative perception out there. And we really need to tackle it head on. And yes, it might be just some trolls on social media or whatever else it is. I don't know. But there is still certainly a very negative perception. And that is one thing that I want to, sort of start, really work on. Even I think recent episode we were just talking about how I'm stepping away from the channel, I think. But it's funny that I'm recording this after that or whatever. But still, this is the one other thing, the most important thing, to the company's success and to getting any kind of deal. Because, I think we've seen it at times here and there with TNA wrestlers crossing over to the WWE and things like that, where they've garnered huge social media numbers and big numbers on TV, on NXT there and things like this, and big reactions at pay-per-views and things like this, engagements and different things. So I do feel like certainly the talent probably are more immune, or I don't know what you would say, but they don't have this same level of negativity floating around them as what the company as a whole does. I feel like the company as a whole has that negativity attached to it in some regard. Even with this WWE TNA partnership, I still feel like some people are going on the side of being like, well, so what kind of thing. And in some ways it is so what in some ways as well, because it is dealing with the third brand effectively, or whatever you want to call it. It's really for the extremely dedicated wrestling fans, who already, that NXT is a pretty niche brand. So again, seeing some stuff with TNA is well, this is, becoming even more of its own niche in a sense. So, and the only time that, TNA person has crossed over to the main roster, or sort of the main roster, or the main shows, has been Joe Hendry at the Rumble. So, and there have been little references and things like that to some stuff in the past and whatnot, but still I do feel like there is that level of issue there that needs to be overcome, and it's one of the things that I want to find people, especially YouTubers and things like that, who do reactions or do discussions about wrestling and say, hey, let's, I've tried it before and haven't had much success, but I've really got to be a bit more annoying, I think, to some of these people and be like writing the DMs or like messaging them again and again and again, and just be like hounding them constantly to be like, hey, you know, are you interested? If you're not interested, like at a certain point I would start saying, like, obviously you're not interested or whatever else it is or whatnot. Maybe they're not seeing the messages, but like at a certain point, you know, it's like, yeah, you know, you've got to be like looking at your DMs or even request DMs and things like that, because anything could come up in your DMs, you know, like you could get really good sponsorship or whatever else it is, and things like that. So again, I think, you know, at a certain point I would have to start saying, well, you know, I've DM'd you before about this, and, you know, you really, you know, like at this point I don't really think you could give two, you know, two craps about it. So, you know, I will now focus my efforts elsewhere, you know, unless, you know, you're really game and, you know, you'll have to get back to me, I'm not getting back to you type thing, you know, with some people. Because, and I understand that people are busy, but if people say, oh yeah, I might be interested or something like that or whatever else it is, it's like, well, now I'm like, don't say that to me. Like, if you're not interested or you, whatever, cool, whatever, I don't care, you know, like, don't lead me on, you know, type thing. If you're just going to be like, well, I've got all this other stuff, I understand that, but if you said yes, you shouldn't have said yes, you know, like, type thing. You should just say, oh, I don't know, I've got all this stuff that I've got to do. And it is tough, I get it, because again, like, it is, again, WWE is like the headlines of everything, and it's like the most newsworthy or whatever else it is, it's the most click-worthy sort of stuff and whatnot. So again, there is that issue. And I do want to sort of go along here and start saying that a lot of these places are very biased. And perhaps, I don't know whether that's fair or whatever else it is, I don't know, in some ways, but I do feel like they are biased. They prominently produce bias content about TNA. Or they will, you know, write these articles in a very biased sort of way. And like stating the facts is one thing, because obviously the TV deal that they have right now is, you know, butts and whatever. But the TV deal, or at least in America it is, but the TV deal that they have in Canada is really good. It's, you know, the WWE's former deal. And we've seen a lot of sort of, you know, well, not a lot, but we've seen a lot of partnership with WWE. So, you know, seeing that additional partnership of saying, well, now you're on the brand that we used to be on. Well, I do feel like TNA should be on the same shows that WWE was on, you know, like, or on the same program, you know, because it's like, now they've lost Raw and SmackDown or whatever it is, and NXT and whatever else it is. It's like, well, you know, there's TNA right there, and that could fill, you know, another 2 hours of programming. So that would be good. And I know that there's that push, or there's that desire from some of these networks for a 3-hour show, but I would think for them to say, let's make, you know, again, going back to it, to say make Explosion 2 hours or whatever else it is, and make it a proper like B show or whatever else it is, not like just, you know, whatever a show that's there and exists or whatever, or even making it like an hour and a half or something like that, or, you know, make it shorter or whatever else, but still make it more, you know, you can still have it a shorter show, but, you know, you make it more of a show that showcases a lot more stuff that didn't really get to make it to TV and things like that. So I think that stuff's really important. And again, you know, that would, you know, like having a B show or whatever else it is, even so, you know, even they already have a C show in Explosion, so making it a better, sort of show in terms of that, just elevating that show up to being like on a bigger standard would be good. But yeah, like again, that negative like perception, because again, like I'm not saying just everything's bad and everything sucks. No, I'm saying I think there is room for improvement here, or I think this is bad, but here is still ways that they could figure out something else, or and here's other things that they are doing really, really well and I really, really enjoy. So I'm balancing out my critiques of saying, hey, this is bad, or whatever else that they could do better there. But over here, they're doing really well here, or they're doing really well there. Some things I do think perhaps need some, like we've sort of talked about it here and there, to raise the profile of everything, are to have, more things for more of the main, especially main stars to do. Like they had some great stuff there for Santana to do with Mustafa Ali, and he's probably going into a program soon with Joe Hendry or whomever. At some point he'll be going into a program with Joe Hendry, at least. But again, the main event scene, like Joe Hendry's been caught up in that 10-man tag recently, and it's like, well, he's very popular, and one of the things that I guess you could critique this for in this way is like, well, could Joe Hendry main event over a 10-man, elimination, oh, not elimination match, steel cage match? He probably couldn't. Like, it would be extremely difficult for him to main event over that sort of thing. Depends on the build and whatever else. But at that point, you're really talking about something more major, and it is a more minor show. Most of these smaller shows are the more minor shows most of the time. And again, like, there wasn't really anything on the line in this match per se. So again, it's one of those things where you've got to look at, like, if you want Joe Hendry, who is, there and he's doing stuff and whatnot, but if you want people to continue to invest, and we've sort of talked about this before, but if you want people to continue to invest, he's got to have something to fight against. He can't just be there, like, and yes, he has something to fight against with the system in a sense, but he's really got to have an opponent. You've got to have somebody there who, it looks like they're about to, challenge him for that title. And it wouldn't be JDC or Myers. I don't know whether you'd make it Eddie. I don't know. And Moose is kind of in the X division right now. So, I mean, you could make it Eddie. Same thing with, like, Eric Young. You could work Eric Young into a feud with him at some point. But yeah, it does feel like some of it's very stalling, and there's like, we don't know what else to do with you, and we don't have enough time to kind of write something for you. And that has been a big problem as well, because like this recent card, they had a whole bunch of stuff that was on that card, and everything was like really good on the card as far as what they like showcased. But realistically, like, most of the matches, or a few of those matches, didn't really need to be there. Like, it's like, why was this match, here, or why was that match here? Like Santana and Mustafa, absolutely, that match deserved to be there. Marsha and Cora 100% needed to be there. And I'm just saying, like, if they had like some of these more major matches and more major feuds that were kind of going on, and then, like, whatever, the high stakes sort of style matches, and then had to save some of those other matches that were just, yeah, they're here and they're good, or whatever else it is, like. And again, like, I do feel like, as I said before, like, they kind of ruined the whole Spitfire versus Elegance story match kind of thing, the flow of everything. They should have just slowed it down and said, okay, we're going to save everything to the pay-per-view and then do something, rather than, doing it on TV and whatnot. No, I think that that whole situation was kind of funny. The whole, servants for whatever, 24 hours or whatever it was, that was kind of funny, and they did some funny stuff. But again, it's like, well, what did that actually do to raise the profile of these girls? Or what did that do to, continue the feud or whatever else it was? It didn't really help much, because like the Elegance duo realistically lost the first match, and then they lost the second match, and then they finally won the third match, when it was 3-on-2 effectively. Well, it really was 3-on-2, but still, it is a very, and I get that that's sort of the heel mantra and the heel stuff, doing things and that sort of thing. But again, it's one of those things that it probably really, hurt them a fair bit, and that probably should have been like one of the last matches, or that should have been where the Elegance people won or whatever it was. But then again, it's like, well, nothing's besides the servitude stuff, nothing's really on the line. The titles weren't on the line or whatever it was. So yeah, I don't know, but funny stuff certainly. But beyond that, I'm gonna forget a whole bunch of stuff here, so I'm not gonna try to go through everything that was on that card again. We talked about it, everything, I couldn't review anything being bad on that show, and perhaps I didn't go deeply enough into discussing why was this put on the show, why was that put on the show, or whatever. There was a few matches that I felt very much what's going on here. And I guess again, it's one of those things where they're trying to tell this story, or they're trying to build things with some of these other people and whatnot, and they've got to feature some of these other guys. You can't have a card of 2 matches or whatever. But I would have thought if you had have given 5 more minutes to Slamovich and Cora, and probably another 10 minutes to the cage match or whatever, and some of the other matches, same with Ali and Santana, another 5 to 10 minutes would have been really good, and whatnot. But yeah, making those bigger matches more important. And I get, again, you might be saying, well, we need some other matches, or we need some other segments to sort of cool things down, because you've got this or whatever else it is. And it I think Leland Lee versus versus Tessa was kind of yeah, that's here and that's okay, and that was a really good match. But again, did it really need to be on pay-per-view? I don't know. Again, perhaps the perspective there is to start saying, well, it's not really to be something that is 100% necessary on the pay-per-view as a card as itself. If you were looking at the card and saying, oh, well, what's this doing here? It's to be well, this is a big draw match, in a lot of ways. And I know a lot of people don't want to sort of, put that kind of thing onto Tessa, because, she's, got that bad reputation again. Another thing that, sort of is lingering around and whatnot still, very much so. So it's one of those things where they haven't really negated that, and they really need to negate that in some ways. But it is tough, and I get, again, someone was saying, oh, they really haven't, they're not letting people ask Tessa the tough questions or whatever else. I mean, she answered some of these tough questions here and there, really, she did, but they haven't really gone in depth too much in it. And they need to say, oh, well, she is here to redeem herself in some ways, and whatnot. They need to, And again, this is why, again, like, you need somebody who, again, is the face of the company. Again, we talked about this before, who is out there, who is like fielding questions and doing press releases and stuff like that and whatnot, and saying, hey, you know, this is why we did this. We didn't just do this because, you know, whatever. You know, in a way they did it because they're desperate, but in a way they did it because they know, you know, hey, at least from a locker room sense, or from a booking sense, or from a talent sense, that, you know, Tessa's money, you know, so let's bring her in and let's do something with her. And it is like, well, you know, go away heat is such a, you know, sort of hard thing to define, and that sort of thing. And again, I'll go back to having that feels like a bias that some people do have, you know, and some people will say, oh, this person, Jeff Jarrett, was never good, or whatever else it was, and that sort of thing. This person was never good, you know, because, oh, they did this and they did that, or whatever it was, you know, like Jeff held Vince up for money and blah, blah, blah. You know, what a dickhead, you know. He only went and started his own wrestling company to crown himself the champion, and da-da-da-da-da, and that sort of thing. You know, if Jeff didn't do it and go and make a wrestling company, I mean, there were lots of wrestling companies sort of forming at that time, because there was a huge gap in the market. Like Ring of Honor was sort of starting to form around that time. There were a bunch of like indie wrestling promotions that were there. Some people even forget that, you know, Hulk Hogan and some other people that were trying to get wrestling shows together and things like this, their own wrestling shows and whatnot. So yeah, like there was a lot of stuff going on. Like New Japan was kind of a thing, you know, but it hadn't really crossed over very much to the Western audience and whatnot. Still, like there was still a little bit, but not a lot. But again, yeah, like there is that, like, no, I don't know, bitter taste, I don't know, or perspective. But still, like we're on this path that you know, they're trying to crack in and do things, and I think again it's one of those big issues. Like I think Anthem and whatnot, they are aware of this, but like honestly, again, we've gone through this a few times where it's like, well, do they really want to like sell off, or, you know, let TNA get bought by somebody else, or, you know, whatever else it is? And like at the end of the day, I don't care who owns TNA, like the figureheads or whoever's behind the company in that regard, who owns the brand, or who, like, eventually someone like they're going to get sold, might get sold again, or might get owned by somebody else. So at some point they might get owned by TKO, they might get owned by somebody else or something else. But the end of the day is, you know, what they've got to do, how the company has got to be elevated overall, not just saying, oh, you know, we'll hope for the best, or whatever it is where we're at, you know, because it's obviously not worked. You know, and even WWE realized, you know, well, we need to, you know, do as much as what we can to be like as mainstream and accessible as possible. Like TNA doesn't need to be at that level, I don't think, but they should be looking at the same sort of thing, you know. And that is one big thing of like wrestling, has that hurdle in a sense to get over. You know, you have that hurdle of, you know, saying, well, like, it's very violent, it's very sexual in some ways. You've got this product like that, and it's like, well, it's for a more mature audience, but the thing is, you kind of want it to be somewhat family friendly, at least to some extent, some degree, or whatever else it is, because that's what, you know, major networks and advertisers, major advertisers especially, want. You know, they want this sort of more clean cut sort of stuff. And WWE somehow, I don't know how they've done it in the last few years or whatever it is with Triple H, but they've found that, you know, space that they can get into, you know, and now their product's, you know, really darn good. But again, they're kind of now on Netflix, so it's much more about they have much more freedom really from the networks than what they did, but they were doing it pretty decently there for a little while they were still kind of on the network, and making things more interesting and making, you know, the stories and whatnot. So again, I do feel like there is that balance that TNA could strike, that kind of, you know, and I think that that's a perfect place for them as well, as far as like storytelling and whatnot, trying to be a little bit edgy, but also having that family friendly element where everyone does feel like, oh, I can take my kids to see this or whatever else, and I don't have to think that, you know, something, you know, not untoward or whatever, but something sort of like that would be at these shows. There is that understanding, you know, that even, you know, it is somewhat more mature or whatever else it is in some sense, that it's like, well, we can't just cater to, you know, that one audience. We've got to cater to a broad audience. We've got to kind of cater to everyone, and the general audience. So like on that perspective, like they are doing a pretty good job, or they're trying to do a good job in that sense of, you know, presenting themselves and trying to not be a middle ground, but be trying to be like something that, you know, like I think like AEW, like anything negative I could say about them or anything positive I could say about them, like they have a good show. But thing is, like, again, their issue, I think one of their issues, like, and they might be trying to sort of soft reset themselves, but one of their problems is like having that too much violence. Like, and I get, again, like sometimes you need that kind of, but again, like it's not the only thing that you need. You need to be able to, you know, and again, like they've downsized their arenas recently, which has been good for them because they're not spending so much money on the arenas. But yeah, like I don't want to continue to like feel like I'm running them down or whatever, anything like that, because I'm not trying to, you know, like I certainly try to say the good things that I think sometimes as well, but you know, I'm not hugely engaged with the product or whatever. Same with WWE. There might be more negative things there that I'm not thinking about or whatever. But again, it is, besides like the obvious stuff, but again, it's like, well, you know, you don't want to paint too much of a brush of one thing. We don't want to just paint WWE with positivity either. But, you know, you've got to recognize that just sitting there and being negative about everything is just like, well, that's not going to get you anywhere, you know, type of thing. So at a certain point, we've got to, you know, be focused on the good things and trying to hope for the best or whatever it is. So yeah, but yeah, like everything's a process. Same for them, same for TNA. It's not like one shoe fits all. I think, like the old saying, the candle that burns twice as bright kind of burns half as long, or whatever it is, that sort of thing. I feel like that's where like AEW is at. Like they're just kind of missing things a little bit, and people aren't really into that anymore. The blooms off the rose, it's not as exciting as what it once was, because it's like, well, you've been here now for a few years type thing. And it's hard with TNA because, again, how do they capture that kind of upwelling of support, or upwelling of feeling of like, well, maybe we should check this out, or whatever it is, or it might be a good show, or whatever else it is. Like, because again, like, honestly, they've done a lot of good things around the place as well. Like, they've gotten a bunch of sellouts now. We've talked about that. And their pay-per-views, like, in general, like, they have had like a lot more going for a lot of these shows. So it's like, well, that can only be good. Like, at a certain point, you've got to, and that's again where we're like at with, like, I think it's Rebellion and Slammiversary. You got to find that tipping point in an extent. But again, that is like Rebellion, and with Slammiversary, those will be big shows. They will be pulling things out of their butt to sell those shows when they're getting closer to those shows. But again, I do feel like it's very tough, because it is one of those things that it is hard to book something so far in advance. But it is one of those things of saying, well, we've got to give people more of a reason to buy this show than it exists and we're coming. Like, sure, and we'll probably see Joe Hendry and the Hardys and all these people. Cool, but it's the rivalries, the matches, and that sort of thing that people kind of buy into coming to see, when a wrestling show is on. They don't just turn up because you want them to turn up. There's a lot of wrestling promotions that have hoped, for people just to be like, oh, we'll turn up just to check it out, or whatever it is. But they haven't gone very far because, just that level of audience isn't a great deal. Like, if you're just getting the local people coming in, sure, you certainly get a few people coming in, especially when it's like, well, when are we going to see Raw or SmackDown or whatever it is, or the WWE? So you've got to have things to supplant those products. You've got to have other things for people to be excited for, so that, you can sell your show. And that is why the importance of more things out there as well. Like, we've sort of said that, like, if TNA gets that better TV deal, it could mean a lot more than just like, well, that's good for TNA. It could mean, well, AEW is now like, well, shit, especially depending on what the numbers are in the viewership and whatnot. But if they're getting like close to 1 million or whatever else it is, then it will be like, well, you know what, or whatever it is, even close to what AEW is doing, like now it'd be like, well, shit, we better pull out our finger and do something, because otherwise their show is going to overtake our show, so then they've got to, if they do that and pull their finger out and say, right, we've got to trim everything down, and we've got to get to the things that really matter, and we've got to find the best things to do, and we can't miss a beat, because otherwise we're losing to TNA. Then TNA's got to come back and do the same thing. Like, there'll be that competitiveness between the two of them to be like, who's really better, and that might even make WWE be like, well, we've got to be the better show, even, so we're not competing that much with them, because again, like, if people are demanding better, it's like, well, at a certain point we've got to kind of listen to what they want and deliver on that, because otherwise we're producing something that people aren't tuning in for, and we're losing that viewership, or that that market share, or whatever you want to call it. So those are the important things to kind of take away from that kind of like perspective, or this kind of perspective, and to not get bogged down too much in like going, well, it's shit, so it will remain shit. It's not shit, you know. Something that's on there might not be the best thing in the world ever, but you know, again, you know, there could be worse things, you know, and again, just saying, oh, it's shit, so therefore I'm not going to waste my time, or well, this one thing was shit or whatever it was, so I'm not going to waste my time with the rest. So 1% of things were bad or whatever, and then I'm not going to bother with the 99. Like, what? But yeah, guys, I think we all get it, but it's just these other like sort of places and other people that are still trying to drag us down and whatnot that we need to address. We really need to, and I don't know whether they'll ever change, but just at least trying to get like this perspective out there of like, man, come on, you're always trashing on them for all this stuff or whatever it was or whatnot and this and that and whatever else it is, and yet here and here they're doing really well. So something's working, and where's your wrestling promotion that's doing better, you know, like type thing, you know, like put up or shut up type things, you know, like that's one thing to me. Like, I don't have a wrestling promotion. I kind of want to get involved in one. There is one locally, but like, again, I've got so much stuff to do and so little time to do it in, so I don't know whether I'll be able to, but maybe we'll find out. But anyway, guys, hope you have enjoyed this one, and I hope you guys will join me again in another one.